Listen close, it's the occult folks. It's the occult folks. It's the occult folks.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have Robby Marx. He is an artist and an upcoming author, and he's worked with bands like the String Cheese Incident, the Dead, and also groups like Pink Floyd. So with that, man, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. Really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thanks for reaching out, man. This is always stuff that I enjoy talking about, going down these roads and kind of just having fun with it all.
Yeah. So you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and kind of where to find you?
Yeah, I'm R. Marx or Robby Marx. I do art for bands, festivals, mom and pop shops, logos, merch design, various stuff like that. As well as in the background, I research and get into a lot of this various symbolism and history, and kind of really enjoy connecting those dots. But if you want to check out my stuff, you can go to my link tree, which is linktree RMARX, and that'll pull up everything I've got from my website, my Etsy, my Patreon. And if you like what I'm talking about, and you want to support, buy some art.
Yeah. Yeah, man. You have some incredible artwork. I highly suggest anybody listening to go check that out. I mean, amazing, amazing work. There's a reason that you're working with some of these top artists because, man, your stuff is incredible. You have a distinct style, like in art. Like, did that come from this type of research, or was that kind of natural to you?
Yeah, it's kind of natural. I mean, my mom says I popped out with a pencil in my hand. I was always like early on, like the Sunday morning papers, when I was like 3, 4 years old, I would sit and just copy kind of the cartoons and learn to draw the different characters. And then I
Hmm.
was drawing my own characters and like, monster truck like Corvettes and ninja type figures. And so I've always been into like, you know, and as far as my favorite artists, Gustav Dorr,
Okay.
who's an illustrator, Hieronymus Bosch, and then Rick Griffin, who did a lot of the Grateful Dead stuff. So
Oh, wow. Interesting.
yeah,
So did that kind of creative thought process lead you down this type of research?
yeah, it's kind of basically the whole research thing. I was more interested in drawing and just creating these ideas and kind of creative play basically.
Hmm.
And through the course of doing the art, I was like, well, you see a symbol and you see it a couple times and you're like, well, that's interesting. What is that? And so, you start to trace these various symbols down. And through the years, you learn about the different stars, the different, religious and cultural movements that precipitated and moved these symbols. And just kind of, then you get into color theory and how, colors affect the cones and rods in the eye. And you start to just, play with these ideas of balance and symmetry, and like all the language of what art itself is includes those symbols. So it was just natural for me to kind of go down and then as you're going down these roads, you want like historical context, so you'll get into researching and learning about the areas and the peoples and the various reasons that they use these symbols. So it's kind of just been a natural progressive kind of function of the art itself.
Yeah, man, I can definitely see how they'll lead you down that pathway. Was there anything specific that kind of got you like deeper down that kind of road?
Yeah, it just kind of became a web after a while.
Yeah.
one thing after another, and then you start to connect the ones and the twos and the threes, and yeah, so it's been just a holistic kind of progressive progress.
Yeah. So I've heard that you started research and you're actually completing an upcoming book.
Yeah, I just sent the last chapter off to the editor, so that's getting pulled together, and then I'm working on illustrations currently for it.
Very
But
cool.
yeah, it's the book is called Nimrod, the first Skinwalker.
Oh
So
shit. Well,
yeah,
you want to give us a little rundown on that and kind of how you
yeah,
kind of got started on that?
it's going through all these histories and all these various symbolic quests and kind of pulling all this stuff together. I had noticed that there was this story that I'd never really seen. People would drop mention it, like, in a single sentence, but you never saw like a holistic, like, book to cover the topic. So
Yeah.
I kind of started, taking notes, and because for years I never even took notes. I was just listening because it was kind of like, just kind of mental entertainment while I worked, getting into some of these, strange kind of esoteric, philosophies. And then at a certain point, I started taking notes. And now I'm a pretty hardcore note taker. If I'm reading a book, I'll just take a picture of it. Or if I have a digital book, then I'll just take a screenshot of it. And then later, I basically throw those in folders and organize them. And so I found this story, and the whole pandemic had happened, and the
Hmm.
music industry had collapsed. So basically I was like, okay, I have some time on my hands, and I kind of just put all this together. And then the editor, I sent it to the editor. He read it 5 times, and he said he's been editing books for 30 years and had never read a book like this, as far as the
Wow.
way it was structured and the amount of,
Oh
because
yeah.
literally, like, I would say each page probably has 50 to 70 notes contained within one page. So it's
Oh,
just like, and I'm just using these notes to compile a story.
okay.
So it's like, and I list all the various, sources as in line with the text. But yeah, there are books like what I've written, in regard to esoteric and occult philosophy. I just think that he had never
Yeah.
seen any, come across that type, because he's editing for, university presses and like different medical journals, and he's more in the mainstream kind of field. But then as the editor was editing it, he's like, this is like blowing my mind, because he's like, he didn't know a lot of this stuff, and
Mm.
he's like researching it to confirm it. And and then he came across, what was it, I was talking about the mystery schools, and
Hmm.
that they all wear the spotted skins, from the leopard skin to the fawn skin of the Bacchus cult, and I said, what was it, John the Baptist wears a spotted camel skin, right? And my editor was like, there's no spotted camels. And I was like, okay. So I, just through the course of researching and investigating, I had to go back to the 16th century, basically, and I found some drawings of tile work from ancient Greece that was of spotted camels. So
Oh,
it took me a minute, but and it's just these really weird kind of things, because the aspect of, within the mystery schools, all these characters, they wear some sort of a skin. Like Nimrod, he wore the spotted jaguar skin,
oh, gotcha.
so, and so it's this, and it has to do with the idea of, some say the stars in the heavens being the spots, while others have said it's potentially, the spots that are on, like, the Amanita muscaria mushrooms, that, like the fly agaric, that you can use for hallucinatory kind of psychedelic kind of effects.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I could definitely imagine that being something that he hasn't come across
Hmm.
regularly. So I've
Yeah.
heard you mention like you pull like archived sources from like the Library of Congress and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, anything that's older than 100 years is in the public domain.
Yeah,
So that's ours to use as a whole, as the people. It's the commons, which is something we need to bring back a little more in regard to this day and age.
yeah,
But nonetheless, within the commons, you can go to archive.org, or you can go to the Library of Congress, or you can go to Google Books, and there's all these there's the Gutenberg Project. There's these various libraries, and there are some specific sites that have just occult kind of alchemical kind of books that you can peruse and get the PDF.
oh wow,
Basically, while I'm doing the art, I have a text to speech app, and I just will import the PDF, and while I'm sitting and working on the art, I have the book kind of going in the background, and so yeah.
that's really cool. What app is that, if you don't
Yeah, I
mind me
have
asking?
the ZenSoft.
Zensoft.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, and then there's another one called let me see what it's called here. It's and interestingly, these are both for the iPhone,
Okay.
natural reader.
Natural
So
Reader.
yeah, ZenSoft and Natural Reader, and
Very
those work
cool.
on the iPhone. And I've actually got a friend that's looking for the app that'll work on an Android. The Natural Read on Android doesn't give you free voices,
Yeah.
so But yeah, what was it? Probably 5 or 6 years ago, I was using this app called Air Read,
Hmm.
and they just phased it out through updates, so it just didn't work
Yeah.
anymore. And there was a
Gotcha.
couple years that service wasn't available unless you paid like $120 a year for it. So, but I mean, within the commons, all this stuff should be accessible. I think
Yeah.
that there should be apps so that anybody can go in and access this stuff and kind of look at it for themselves. But that's the thing with history, is when you're going through history. Who was it? There was a researcher. I'll think of it in a minute. But
Hmm.
basically, it's the idea that every person that goes into these studies, into these histories, you're within your own mind, you're bringing history alive, and you're making connections based upon your own interpretation that people may have never made before.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like all of our own individual journey into this information. And then you get into philosophy, and it's the idea that all these ideas could potentially be seen as true. It's like you have to stand in their shoes and kind of take it on and understand what it is. But at the same time, none of it's true. So if you stand in that disposition of it's all possible but nothing's true, then you don't become necessarily dogmatic about anything, you know.
Yeah. I mean, that's honestly a really good way to kind of approach life in general
Yeah.
and this type of learning, man. It's honestly a beautiful way to look at everything. So, so will this be your first publication?
Well,
Well,
publication,
written
written
publication.
publication,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so did it just start from just like kind of this gathering of information, and you're like, holy cow, I think I have enough to kind of publish a book?
Yeah, yeah, that's
That's really
pretty much. And I just kind of put it together for my own entertainment. Kind of, and it's like, besides sitting and doing the art, and I like that kind of meditative, place that it takes you to,
yeah,
that stillness that you're in. But then on the other hand, when I'm sitting and I'm like taking all these notes and organizing them and kind of putting them in categories and then, kind of building a story from that. That's a whole nother level of enjoyment.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can imagine. So for a skinwalker, is that like just like a technical, like he's actually wearing somebody's skin, or is it kind of a metaphor for?
Yeah, and this is, like I remember went to a party at a friend's house, and
Mhm.
they're like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm working on this book." And they're like, "What's it called?" And I'm like, "Nimrod, the first Skinwalker." And they're like, people hear that and they're like, "Whoa, hold on." And so yeah, he is actually where and a couple of people that are really into biblical studies have come after me and said that these are the skins that God made to clothe Adam and Eve.
Mhm.
But if you go back into the earliest rabbinical writings, the word for in Hebrew, the word for skin and the word for light, there's one letter difference, but they're pronounced the same. It's or. So and there's basically within the earliest rabbis, they talk about the idea that in order for the human form to be able to descend into matter when getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden, there's like a dimensional transformation from
Mhm.
like the state of pure light within the heavenly realm, kind of moving down into matter. So we needed the skin, to be able to subside and exist within three-dimensional reality that is matter. So
Gotcha.
there's the earliest idea of the skin that we wear as our body, is this skin that was given to the human in order to be able to um, transcend and fall into matter. So basically Nimrod and when Adam and Eve die, there's taught a lot of people are like, well, what about the story in the Book of Treasures? Well, that wasn't written until like around 600-700 AD, and it was written under a false name that said it was written about 400 AD. So it's pseudofigural, it's non-canonical, which a lot of these works are non-canonical, being in the sense that they're not part of the official King James Bible, right?
Yeah.
But there was a controversy of Adam where they basically were hammering down all the aspects of the Old Testament and the creation story, and there was arguments over a lot of this stuff, and it was about what was it, 5 to 6, around 600 AD, where these books came out, and they called them the String of Pearls, and it was the Book of Adam and Eve and the Book of the Cave of Treasures that basically had these intricate stories of the existences of Adam and Eve, right?
Oh
But
shit.
these weren't written until a later
Hmm.
point, when the Catholic Church was kind of really kind of solidifying itself. But if you go back to the earliest meaning, it is the actual skin of Adam that is preserved, carried across during the flood by Noah, and then is stolen by Ham, who basically is the
Holy shit.
guy. Yeah, so Ham in the Bible, he's one of Noah's sons, and he basically is the guy that went into Ethiopia. He was behind the Canaanites, and these were the ancient stone builders that were like building all the large edifices with these cyclopean, stones that we see all over the planet. That a
Hmm.
lot of people are like, they had to have advanced technology to be able to do this stuff,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, so these Canaanites, Ham, when he went into Ethiopia, he basically set up the worship of the gods, and then he basically moved those into Egypt. And there's a direct correlation. You can find charts from some of the early researchers about how the Ethiopian gods correspond with the Egyptian gods. And, this whole thing precipitates in this character of, what is it, Thoth, who I think is also potentially Osiris and Horus, and he's writing himself into multiple parts. But it gets into this whole idea of this dead and dying God man, where basically, the God King on earth, he'll die, and then his wife will become impregnated by him a lot of times after he's dead. And then the offspring is the reborn father that is now the son. And then the mother will marry the son. So it's this, but nonetheless, it leads to the idea of transubstantiation, because generally, on the early cultures believe that when you died, you went to like this timeless place like Sheol, where it was like sleeping and kind of until the end of time, and then you were like getting into Zoroastrianism, you were judged. But this whole evolving philosophy brought about the idea of an afterlife where you would transcend into the heavens. So you start to see these spreading mystery schools based around this idea of, death and rising into the heavens, and these different characters that are basically like keys that open this lock, that like open this portal that is the way, like Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the light. This way for you to ascend into higher forms of being,
Yeah. Holy shit. So Ham wound up stealing like that. Sorry to go back to that.
Oh yeah. The skin.
Yeah. How did that kind of all go down?
Yeah. There's a couple different stories of this, let's see, within the Bible, there's one lineage. Madame Blavatsky presents another lineage. You see in various old Persian texts and within Hebrew texts, they talk about that Ham. In one story, it said, when the ark landed, Ham just left with the skin. They don't say specifically he stole it.
Yeah. Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so there's different, and there's one story where, what was it? The curse of Cana, when Noah, after he plants the first vineyard, he gets drunk and he passes out. And there's this whole kind of idea of sodomy, or basically where Ham gets with the mother or the wife of Noah. And then when Noah wakes up and sees what happens, he curses Cana and says, you'll be the slave of slaves. And Cana is that Ethiopian region, where the Canaanites are from. Yeah. So basically, but there's one story where during that whole cursing of Cana, where Ham steals the skin at that point. So there's, multiple stories of how it came into Ham's hands. But nonetheless, Ham, when Nimrod was born, Nimrod was his favorite, and of all the children. And so basically he gives it to Nimrod. And then Madame Blavatsky in Isis Unveiled, she says at the age of 22, there's other sources that say at the age of 20 that he put the skin on. And basically that's when he became the all-powerful kind of ruler over Mesopotamia, essentially,
Holy shit. So, from the understanding, he was actually like wearing like the skin of Adam, possibly.
Yeah.
Damn. Well, and that's supposed to have given him some sort of power.
Yeah, because you figure when the Elohim, or when God basically made this skin for the divine couple before they were thrown into, it was made in paradise, right?
Yeah.
So there's this whole line within the story. That the skin itself, it's quote unquote smelled of paradise, right?
Damn, yeah.
So when And when Adam would go out originally, none of the animals were afraid of him, and Adam named all the animals. And there's a story where it's multiple stories where the animals come through and he names all the animals,
Wow.
and gives them their names. Right. So, the animals weren't afraid of Adam because he had that smell of paradise, like as far as his bodily essence, so
Holy
when they
shit.
so
I've
when they
never
took
heard it put that way, man.
yeah. So, well, and this is all like, just like years of deep diving on these
Yeah.
different religious philosophies from, Christianity into Hebrew, into getting into Zoroastrianism, looking at the
Yeah.
Persian text. Even within Islam, there's a lot of the early creation stories as far as, the Elohim, basically handing down the language to humankind in a book.
Yeah.
There's just all of these different cultures have all of these different little beautiful tidbits,
Yeah.
that like these little pearls that you can just kind of string together,
Exactly.
and so basically once Nimrod gets the skin, right, and some of the Hebrew sources say it was more of like a cloak than
Okay.
it was like Buffalo Bill or Leatherface.
Yeah, like
Like
Texas
actually,
Chainsaw Massacre or something. Yeah.
But when Nimrod would put the skin on, he was known as the Great Hunter, right?
Mhm.
And it's detailed in a few places that the animals, when they smelt the heavenly paradise, that they weren't afraid of Nimrod. So all the animals would basically come and gather around Nimrod, and he could just kill and take whatever he wanted. And and initially he was like taking these animals and sacrificing them to the Lord, and then there's a certain point at which he turns and basically becomes the adversary per se.
Oh, damn. Was there anything that like kind of caused that, or did this kind of like power just kind of get to him?
Yeah, there's some stories that he had gone to a certain character and learned divination, as far as learning the zodiac and learning astrology,
Hmm.
and then in combination with that, learning the divining and learning how to kind of connect to these divinatory kind of forces that are in the ether, kind of like when you play with a Ouija board, or when like somebody will channel, information, or you go back to these ancient Chaldean oracles coming out of Babylon, right?
Hmm.
And then it was later that the Chaldean oracles were kind of reformulated from the ancient information, and they became the various oracles throughout Greece and into Rome, and kind of that affected the overall building and how those governments operated. And what is it? The whole idea that like they say the millionaires and the billionaires are the ones that have the astrologers that tell them
Hmm.
when to do things on
Yeah.
certain dates, and very much along these same kind of lines is they were looking for sign. And even the Bible says, there'll be signs in the heavens. So a lot of people think this is justified, within the aspects of kind of divining and doing these various kind of um, occult type oracles,
Oracles. Yeah.
like the magic 8 ball. You shake it up and it's like, not today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So is there that kind of thing where like the Bible or that kind of spirituality does work off of um like the star alignments and that? Are they like kind of interconnected?
yeah,
Like
if you
do
go
you see it
back,
that way?
well, if you go back into all of the ancient philosophies, right,
Hmm.
there's a kind of butting of heads between this idea of, because when the fallen angels came down,
Hmm.
they were the ones that taught, us astrology, and taught us how to do these oracles, and taught makeup, and taught, every method of death in the womb, and taught like all these different kind of, the like how to build depending on the text you read, they give you all these different things that these fallen kind of entities that basically mated with and had offspring that were the Nephilim, which were the giants in the early days of, before the flood. And so these things are generally tied to more kind of root kind of physical practices that relate to the physical world. Right. Whereas then you have this other philosophy of higher thinking, higher realms of being. In one school, you have the planets being, the many gods. Right. And then you have within the other philosophy, the one true God. So you have this diametric of, the gods that are more within the sphere of reality, because they're represented by their energies are represented by the planets, right? So they're essentially gods of this realm. Whereas then you have the other higher dimensional thinking, which became, Zoroastrianism into the Judaism, or the Israelite, I should say, early on. The Judaism didn't come until later, and then into Christianity, Judaism, and a lot of people will say that those two are the same, but the Israelites pretty much, got wiped out, and then there was a reformation that became Judaism, and then that also falls into Islam as well. So you have, and then if you get into the Eastern schools, you have the ideas of nirvana, like the singular Godhead, kind of, that all emerged from, that precipitated the 10,000 gods. It's interesting because the more you go down the line of the gods, the more it leads you back to the singular point of explosion or origin, and there are a lot but I think one is more physical, whereas one is more higher realm, astral.
Yeah, it makes sense. So where did you start seeing these type of mystery schools start to pop up, like within history, and like who was kind of behind that?
So if you get into the Phrygian hat, which we have, if what is it, a bunch of the military wings, they have the Phrygian hat in their logos. If you look on the early American coinage, like the Liberty silver dollars, she's wearing the Phrygian hat. You see it just in governmental logos, in money production, in military and intelligence services. You see this Phrygian hat that kind of proliferates. And then if you trace that back, during the French Revolution, they would basically wear this Phrygian hat to let each other know that they were on the same side together, as far as being the illuminated ones that were progressing the idea of revolutionary philosophy, right? But then you can trace that back further to the Saturnalia in Rome, which is where basically the freed slave, or the slaves, they would switch place with the masters for a day, right? And they would wear the Phrygian cap, because it was the symbol of, and it became the symbol of the freed slave. So when the Romans were freed from their servitude, they would wear this Phrygian hat as the symbol of the freed slave. And then you trace that back, and it goes back into ancient Phrygia, who Virgil, in his writings, basically wrote the propaganda for Rome that linked Roman religion back to ancient Phrygia. Then you get back to ancient Phrygia, and you have Attis and Cybele, this goddess and kind of the offspring of the hermaphrodite that basically becomes apotheosized or turned into a god.
Yeah.
So and this Cybele and Attis in ancient Phrygia, where you find this earliest Phrygian hat, is one of the origins of the beginnings of the mystery schools.
Damn.
Yeah, so you can trace that all the way
Yeah.
back to about 12,000 BC.
Yeah. Holy cow. I mean,
Yeah.
what kind of things would they like kind of teach people at these type of schools?
Yeah, so when you get into a lot of the early philosophy, it was the idea of fate or fata, the wheel of fortune,
Hmm.
that basically those gods, those planetary gods, they basically controlled different parts of your body. Like one
Damn.
would control your sexual function, one would control your stomach and how hungry you were, one would control your heart, how much empathy you had, or how cold you were. One would control your throat and your speech. One would control, your mind and your thinking. And
Hmm.
basically, there was this idea that we were kind of just like puppets in the sway of how the planets moved, and those things would, as above, so below, as on earth, so in heaven.
Hmm.
They would basically, they would contribute to our fate, in the sense that it was already written and you're just dancing the dance of the gods, right?
Yeah.
And I think when the mystery schools started to come along, what they were doing was basically taking people and removing them from the idea of fate and giving them like enlightenment and self-destiny.
Oh,
Yeah. So early on,
really
I
cool.
think that these things were a really good thing.
Hmm.
But then as they get bigger and bigger and bigger, in some cases, they assimilated full governments. It was in Athens, where these Cybele and Attis, that same Phrygian mystery school,
Hmm.
Attis, one of the initiates of Attis, came in, one of the priests, and
Hmm.
sat down and started teaching the women in Athens about the mystery schools coming out of Phrygia. And they took that priestess, because they would dress, they were men, they were
Hmm.
demasculated, and they would dress in women's clothes, right? And so in Athens, they took that high priest of Cybele and just threw him head first into a pit and killed him, right?
Damn.
And so then almost immediately a plague came in, and they were like, oh my God, what's going on? So they go to the oracle, the Sibylline oracle, one of these Chaldean type oracles. And they're basically like, why is this plague killing all our people all of a sudden? And they're like, that's because you killed the priestess of Cybele. So you need to go back to Athens, and basically in the town center, build a statue to Mother Cybele. And they were like, okay. So they went back and they built this statue, and the plague ended, right? And
Damn.
then the mystery schools of Cybele and Attis, or Mother Cybele, come into Athens. And by the time everything's said and done, all of the town records and governmental affairs records are stored in the temple of Cybele. So
Yeah.
they basically subsume the government. And the same thing in Rome, when they brought Mother Cybele into Rome and brought her and put her on Palatine Hill. She was the mother of all the gods. And like I said, Virgil had written that early propaganda to tie Rome to ancient Phrygia. So they
Yeah.
recognized this mother goddess as, the mother of all the gods, right?
Damn.
And when they brought her in, that became the state religion of Rome, at the
So
time.
yeah, so was this like the beginning of like government trying to replace the idea of God, like within people and kind of that control, like you said, like they control each aspect, like your mind, your heart, your stomach, like government.
Right,
Like I can
right,
imagine they do that through like what you eat, through what you watch,
right.
whatever they put out, like different aspects of your
Everything, man.
body. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
was
then,
that kind of like the beginning of it?
and there's, yes. But I think it goes back way before even
Oh, okay.
recorded history.
Oh,
That,
okay.
that there's always been a consistent struggle between the king and the crown, or the crown and the altar.
Hmm.
As
Yeah.
far as you would have the shaman or the witch doctor, or whoever it was that was always the advisor to the chief of the tribe, you
Hmm.
know and depending on the dialectic, one might have more power than the other.
Yeah.
One may just be a puppet of the other, you
Yeah.
know so, and kind of, when you get into these different types of gods coming in and taking over these various governments,
Hmm.
the same struggle is happening between the religious aspect and the governmental aspect, and that's
Yeah.
been a consistent thing, right up into present.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I think there's like a ton of evidence of that, especially now. Back to Nimrod. How long did he kind of rule, and did he kind of use that sort of skin to rule like in other ways other than hunting?
Yeah, he was going around, at this point, and basically just overrunning nations, and crucifying kings alive. He was just doing all of these, but at the same time, he was also building. He was building cities. He was building, these walled cities. And you see Mother Kibble.
Hmm.
She, a lot of times, she wears a crown that is a walled city. So, this idea of the walled city, runs hand in hand with these mystery schools. And Nimrod, he was also related with Pharonius, who basically, after the flood, kind of brought people out of the fear of the jungle, and brought them around fires. And then he was like, if you want to be really safe, come into the city that I'm building, and it's walled in, and you'll be protected, and everything will be beautiful. And Nimrod, he's also, acclaimed with setting up the first weights and measures, as far as ending barter and trade, and beginning the use of, some type of a currency. He's credited with, and then, you can kind of take that into the Masonic philosophies, right?
Hmm.
And Nimrod, was considered to be the first Freemason, in the
Okay.
sense, yeah, because he was, in one culture, they called him Nimamud, was he who makes things. And he was credited with making the first bricks. So
Wow.
within the idea of masonry, bricks, or these squared stones, essentially, are a essential function within the idea of Masonic philosophy. And then
Yeah.
Nimrod was also the cat that, built the Tower of Babel. you know
Wow.
yeah.
So was there like an account of like him doing it? I know like between books, even people like King Solomon, there's different accounts of
Yep.
how they build like certain architecture. Like in the
Right.
Quran, it says like he summoned like a jinn to help him like
Oh
build
yeah.
certain architecture. Was there anything crazy like that that you came across with Nimrod?
Yeah, well, in that story, he summoned that jinn to get this red stone that they brought from like 300 or 500 miles away,
Hmm.
and they brought it up out of a river, and used that as the cornerstone for Solomon's temple. Yeah, that's a good
Wow.
story. But with Nimrod and the tower, basically he gathers all of these remains of these Rephaim, these, the collapsing line of the Nephilim. Because
Hmm.
basically, once those giants came into play, they would breed, and every time they would breed, they would get smaller and smaller and smaller.
Hmm.
And even now, some people have characteristics of what those ancient giants used to be, being two rows of teeth,
Yeah.
6 fingers, 6 toes, but nonetheless, these degrading lines of giant. And I even found one story where it said that Noah and Melchizedek and Shem also from the Bible help to Nimrod, but that would be kind of
Wow.
contrary to the story, considering Nimrod was, you know, a hunter in the face of, he was kind of against, and that's why they were building this Tower of Babel, was they wanted to get back into the Garden of Eden so that they could basically set up their own throne, so they could have some say in how the universe was ruled. And they also wanted access to the tree of life within the Garden of Eden, because these degraded Nephilim, as they're, you know, dying out, when their bodies would die, because of the type of energetic force that they got trapped on Earth and became essentially the demons that you know, and the jinn as well as another thing that they said they turned into. But basically they wanted to get to the tree of life so they could eat from the tree of life and live forever in their fleshly bodies and not have to, because, you know, they're basically caught in the matrix. Once they descended from that higher light realm into matter, they're basically caught in the matrix of matter until the end of time now, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Damn. So is that kind of part of, like, when they come down here, was that part of their agreement that they're like, whenever they die, they're kind of just like stuck, their spirits just kind of stuck and linger?
Yeah, I think it was just a byproduct that they didn't really think about until after the fact.
Damn.
You know.
Yeah, man. That's goes pretty deep.
I do think that there was some divination in regard to the creation and the, you know, movement of these various mystery schools. But generally, he was more a power monger. And I think the skin, or the skin, you know, the skin of Adam was basically just one of his accoutrements that he had, as far as within all of, because Nimrod being the great hunter, right? He also domesticated the leopard, and started to use it for hunting purposes, as well as he was claimed in Persia to be the first one to domesticate the dog for hunting purposes. So, yeah, or the wolf, whatever it was, you know. But all the dogs, I guess they say, go back to essentially the wolf, you know, in genetics. But yeah, so, and then within that, you know, that precipitates him wearing this leopard skin, and you can just see that spotted skin that we were talking about earlier, just being passed down through these different type of occult philosophies through time. You know?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely see that. Have you found any kind of like record or anything that he passed that type of skin down to, like Adam's spiritual skin?
Yeah. So what ended up happening with the skin is there's various stories of and so when you get into the idea of these cut up gods, these dead and risen gods, right? There are mention of 2 Nimrods. There are mention of 2 Thoths. There are mention of, so you start to get into this idea of within the mystery schools. So if we look at Osiris, right? Basically Osiris, who was running one of these type mystery schools in the ancient labyrinth of the Great Pyramids, right? And I don't know if you just saw, but with the LiDAR scans of the pyramid, but not the pyramid itself, but at the same time within the LiDAR scans, they also found the ancient labyrinth that's next to the pyramids. Nobody's talking about that.
Really? So what they find with that? I don't think I've seen that.
Yeah, so basically this goes back, you know, and all of the ancient philosophers from Greece, Plato, you know, Homer, all these guys with Maimonides, all these guys would go to Egypt to be initiated into the mysteries, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So they would go to Egypt and they would basically have an initiatory ritual that they would go into this labyrinth that was next to the pyramids. And Herodotus, he talks about when you stood and looked, that it was a field of stone on top, like just perfectly flat stone. And, and then when you would go into the labyrinth, we know it was at least 2 levels deep, but it was said to be all these cyclopean stones, like perfectly stacked, with stones put on for the roof, that were all intricately carved in, ancient Egyptian mythology and symbolism. And basically you would go and what was it, not Homer, one of the philosophers talked about he could only go into the first level, because below that was where all the priests and the pharaoh and all the high, castes of the different Egyptian gnomes would come in and do their sacrifices and their divination to the different gods of the different gnomes. And so he was only allowed to go into the first level. But he said there was something like over 3,000 different rooms in this labyrinth. You couldn't go in and get out unless you were with somebody who knew the way, all of these old philosophers from Greece were going to Egypt to get initiated into the mysteries, and as far as the mystery school stories, back to Osiris, right? He was basically married to Isis, his sister, and then his other brother was Set, and Set was jealous of Osiris. He kind of liked Isis a lot, and there was this inherent thing that Set was kind of always chaotic and having darkness kind of inserted in his aura, whereas Osiris was more light oriented. But then there's other stories where if Set is Seth from the Bible, then it was actually Osiris who's the dark one and Seth who is the light one, right? But nonetheless, Set, he tries to kill Osiris. He creates this jewel encrusted coffin, like a box, and Set actually measured Osiris's shadow to get the exact dimensions of the box. And then at a party, it was like Cinderella, whoever tries this magnificent box and fits perfectly, they can take it home, right? So the whole party, too fat, too short, too thin, and finally Osiris, he gets in the box, and they're like perfect fit, and they throw the cover on, and they said, one text said they sealed it with lead, one text said they nailed it down, and there was 72 conspirators that basically were behind all this. Some say they were the judges of the gnomes from Egypt, but they basically took that box with Osiris and they threw it in the Nile River, and it floated down and went down to ancient Byblos, which is where we get the word book, which is where they were making papyrus, and they were basically making some of the first books, essentially, right? And that coffin with Osiris landed in Byblos, and this tamarisk tree grew around it. And King Melkort at the time, who was in Byblos, he basically saw this great tamarisk tree that had grown almost like overnight, and so they cut it down, and he used it as a pillar in one of his temples, right? And it, again, back to this fragrant aroma, this beautiful like Adam's skin, right? This pillar was said to have this same fragrant aroma, which some of the stories say allowed Isis to come and find him. And they cut the pillar open, and Osiris falls out, right? And they have to revive him. So that's the first death of Osiris in the physical world, right? And then he goes back to Egypt, and Set sees he's still alive and gets really upset and ends up chopping Osiris into 14 pieces, right? And so those 14 pieces, and again, Isis goes out to find these 14 pieces. And this kind of story goes back into ancient shamanism, into ancient Chinese kind of stories where they'll scatter these bones of the god, and everybody gets excited and starts lamenting and crying until the bone, and then the high priest would say, all the pieces are found and the god is one again. So this kind of has an ancient history of these various pieces, right? But the phallus, or the generative organ of Osiris, it gets thrown in a river and gets eaten by a fish. So they can't find his reproductive organ, right? So this is when Isis basically makes the first obelisk, right? But this is also when she makes the first mummy. So this is the first mummy ever, where she gets all the pieces and wraps them up and makes a mummy, and then she makes an obelisk, the first obelisk. Some said it was of earth, some say it was of gold, but nonetheless, and then she does this crane dance where she levitates above the obelisk and basically separates, matter from the cosmos, and which is very much the same story of the dove coming down, back to Semiramis and ancient Sumerian kind of Babylonian stories that separated the heavens and the earth, right? And nonetheless, she becomes impregnated. She pulls the seed of Osiris up through the obelisk and is impregnated and basically has the child Horus. And this is the resurrected Osiris. So this is one of the original mystery schools of, the physical rebirth and the cosmic rebirth, both within this whole story, right? And from that, you see various other mystery schools springing up. So you start to see, this philosophy moving more into use in all these different nations, and that place where Osiris landed in Byblos, right? So if you take the name Byblos, right, as far as that city, right, that's what the Greeks called it, as far as Byblos. But if you get into the Phoenician name for it, it was called Gibel, right? So the Phoenicians call this town where Osiris came Gibel. And within Gibel, you have the worship of Adonis, who is birthed from a myrrh tree. Myra, his mother, or Mira, his mother, basically through this whole cascade of events, she's transformed into a myrrh tree, and the myrrh tree cracks open and Adonis is born in this very same city where they cut open the pillar in the temple of King Melkort, and Osiris came out of. So you have the same story analogously, right? And with Adonis, which is one of these mystery schools, the people within Gibel that worship Adonis, right, were the Giblamites, or the Giblites. And when Solomon was building Solomon's temple, right, and he got a hold of the king of Tyre, he got these Giblamites that were these sacred temple builders that had lineage all the way back to Nimrod and the building of the Tower of Babel, right? And so these Giblamites, they basically come in to help Solomon build Solomon's temple, and they model it off of a Tyrian or a Phoenician temple.
Yeah, so is that some of the architecture that you kind of see all around the world that's extremely similar?
Yeah. Well, in these Giblamites, they're basically tied directly in with Dionysus. And so you see that expanding into Greece, and those sacred temple builders were the ones that were building all of the Grecian monuments. And this group of Giblamites are who the Freemasons directly tied themselves to as well. So besides
Holy shit.
Nimrod, they also, and these Giblamites, they were the stone squares. They talk about them in Kings in the Bible, but they were basically the ones that perfected the stones and made them perfectly square, very much like the philosophy of the initiate into Freemasonry being the rough stone, and they're going to put him on the square.
Yeah.
But these Giblamites came in, and they were known for 7-tone carving, which I think they carved things in like 7 layers. And they were doing, intricate kind of murals of lions and all these different creatures and kind of the oxen, and around the top of the columns, they were carving like blue lotuses, and, and within, this was all very non-typical kind of for the Hebrew philosophy at the time, So, but you see this early Freemasonic ancient temple builder kind of that goes back to, Nimrod and the construction of Babel, kind of coming in and contributing to the building of Solomon's temple.
Yeah, man, that's a crazy account. So that's going through like research of multiple sources and
Hundreds and
yeah,
hundreds
and
of
like
books,
kind of
man.
putting it all together. It's honestly, it's a really cool way to kind of like put together like that entire story like within yourself instead of just going off on one account, man.
Right.
So like Solomon kind of uses the same type of lineage to build his own type of temple.
Right.
Was there anything crazy that you found within Solomon? I'm sure there's probably a bunch.
Yeah, but on what was it, Occult Rejects?
Uh-huh.
I talked to Nick. We did and Teresa. We did, I think, a 5-part series on Solomon's Temple, building of the temple. And if you go check out on the Metta Mindcast, they're in there. They're mixed in there. But
Yeah,
there's
I'll
a
definitely
5.
check that out. Yeah.
So it's about 10 hours on Solomon's Temple
Wow.
from essentially the before Solomon, when it was called the Terrible Hill. This was essentially the place where the original altar of Adam and Eve was, in accordance with the Hebrew writing, right? As far as the rabbis and the various, I think if you get into Louis Ginsburg's books, the history of the Jews, it's like a 7-volume set, but he goes pretty into detail about a lot of this stuff. But that was the first altar that Adam and Eve had set up, where they were making their sacrifices earlier. And, there's also stories of Adam and Eve, Adam basically taking 5 sacred stones, some say 6, from different mountains and being the first hinge builder. They set up this altar that was essentially where the first human murder was, when Cain killed Abel,
Gotcha.
So this altar basically, it got washed over by the flood, right? And when you get into Isaac, Abraham and Isaac, right?
Yeah.
So Abraham is told by God to sacrifice his only begotten son Isaac, right? And so he takes him up to the mountain. And if you get into the Hebrew text, he's really excited that he's going to be the sacrifice, and he's like, tie the cords tight so I can't get away, it's like right.
Yeah.
And there is some,
I love this game.
I know, right. I'm going to see God. So but there is some supposition that originally he did indeed sacrifice his son, but that later it was kind of covered up, because there was a element of sacrificing your firstborn, back in these times. So, but nonetheless, that altar where Abraham is going to sacrifice Isaac is the exact same place that Adam and Eve's altar was, right?
Damn,
and so when the flood had happened, it kind of disconnected that altar. So they needed a sacrifice to reactivate that altar. So basically, and right as he's doing it, the angel Michael is there, and he's like crying, and some of those tears got in Isaac's eyes, which is why they said he became blind, like didn't have great eyesight later in life. And nonetheless, they end up stopping the sacrifice, and this is when they find the scapegoat or the ram that's in the thicket that they end up sacrificing. And when they do that, that reconnects that altar to, and this is supposed to be directly under the point where the Adam and Eve were ejected out of heaven, right?
Yeah.
So this is what ends up becoming Solomon's temple.
Holy shit.
That same
Yeah.
altar and portal and everything connected back to the divine couple, falling into matter.
Yeah, so I was gonna ask, were they seeing like the Garden of Eden as something that wasn't here on Earth? They were kind of seeing it as something in a kind of a different realm or space?
Yeah, if you get into some of the texts, they say it was in a certain region on the earth. You get into some of the other texts and they say it was like a higher, like divine, kind of more where things were made of light, more so, a higher dimensional level. There's numerous different stories, there's even some that pontificate on the idea that it may have been like another dimensional plane. Kind of when you get into because there's the story of the Cave of Treasures, and it's kind of a cult. Once they leave and they sin with the Canaanites, that they can't enter back into the cave. So there's this idea, it just depends on the story you get into.
Yeah. What do you personally like see it as, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh yeah. I kind of take it all as a whole. And like I said, I see it all as possible, but I see it all as not necessarily true. I see it more as like Jesus, how he says he teaches in parable. So I see it as like allegory. It's a way to explain things that we have no other way to comprehend. And you get into like the Bhagavad Gita, as far as the Indian texts, and they say that basically we are the ones that set the wheel of time in motion when we kind of came into this realm, and there's this Lucifer-like character that's talking to this human, and he's like, you are divine, be all, any creation in the entire universe. You're the most beautiful thing, you sit the highest on the tree of life, and like you are the thing that set time in motion, right? And then you get into the story of Saturn, and when he threw up that rock that became one of the oracle rocks in Italy, that was said that he started time. So there's this intricate idea between the creation of humanity and the beginning of time itself, So, and then you have the Enochian calendar, which says it's like a 7,000 year calendar. Then you get 1,000 years later, you get the Hebrew calendar that says it's a 6,000 year calendar, and then the way we have the Gregorian and all these different calendars now, a lot of people have no clue, it's like,
it's impossible. Yeah, it feels almost impossible to really get a grasp on what the hell that anything even is, or so it almost is like what you do is like you learn about everything and you kind of research like into a ton of different topics and look at multiple sources. I mean, that's what it takes really to kind of figure any of this really out. I mean,
And inherently, I don't know that there is any truth, but there are many interpretations, and I think that the kind of bigger picture you can see, there's a Grateful Dead song that never got recorded on an album, back in the early, when they were transforming from the Warlocks into the early Grateful Dead. But that song, it's called The Faster We Go, the Rounder We Get. And I think it's that idea where the more you take in, the more of a rounded, holistic kind of view that you kind of have of these things. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, no, exactly. So, so if you don't mind me, how did you get into the Grateful Dead?
Oh, let's see. So I used to DJ, and I was DJing um, in New Orleans and Atlanta, in Biloxi and Vegas and Denver. Um, I was DJing all over the country. Like when I was 14, I basically went out and started just DJing because
Oh,
it,
cool.
it was what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I want to say when I was 19, I was big into like hip hop, East Coast, West Coast, like Miami bass kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And when I was like 19, I want to say I was in college at the point, and I used to DJ for a bunch of frats then.
Yeah.
But this kid that I was hanging out with, he came and he's like, because he knew I was driving all over the place doing these different event, DJing at these different events. And he's
Mhm.
like, I have to go out to Vegas to pick up my girlfriend. And he's like, I'll pay for your gas. I'll pay for all your accoutrements. I'll pay for the tickets when we get there. And basically, we'll go see the Grateful Dead because that's where his girlfriend was.
Yeah.
And I was like, sounds good. Let's go. And so, we go out Las Vegas, and basically we pull in, and I was just like, kind of like, there's like a whole kind of culture here, of
Yeah.
people doing their own things, the bartering and the trading,
Yeah. What
and
year was that?
yeah, 94. So
94. Oh, cool.
yeah, I only got to see the Grateful Dead, for 1 year.
Yeah, that
Various
was around.
shows.
Yeah, that was around the time. Yeah, Jerry was kind of ending, I guess, or before he
Yeah,
died.
before he went into rehab. Yeah, yeah. But basically, I was like, because I had already been making art and kind of DJ. I was doing all the flyers for DJing, and
Hmm.
and I was like, I see some potential in this whole thing, and I
Yeah.
like the whole boho kind of hobo kind of lifestyle,
Yeah.
and kind of went out and just started following the Grateful Dead around.
Yeah.
You
Like
know.
settle into Shakedown Street, kind
Yep.
of that they
Yep.
have.
Yep.
So did you start traveling kind of with the band a little bit, selling your art like pretty
Yeah.
immediately, or?
Immediately, I was selling stuff I shouldn't have been selling, and a lot of beers. We were making burritos. We had
Yeah,
bottomless lemonades with tequila
man.
shots, and just all
Hell
this.
yeah.
My wife was doing hair wraps, just all this different stuff, and then I got my first piece of art printed up,
Hmm.
and I went to a show and I think I had 70 of them. And I was standing, and this was at Red Rocks in Colorado. And I was
Hell
standing
yeah.
before they put the steps in.
Yeah.
And I was standing at the top of lot 2, I think, as you're
Hmm.
going up past the trading post. And I sold all 70 of those posters in less than half an hour for $10
Damn.
a piece. And I just had a knot in my pocket. And I was like, and that's pretty much when I went, full gangbusters. At one point I was doing upwards of 80, 85 shows a year, you know.
Wow.
Yeah. And now I do like 5 maybe.
Yeah, so
You
where was the kind of that transition to where you're kind of touring with these bands to actually like making the artwork for some of them?
So just by being out in the public and selling art, I started to
Yeah.
have bands, ask me, do you want to do a poster? And that precipitated, and the portfolio has just kind of built itself,
Yeah. Do you remember like the first one that you're just like, holy shit, I can't believe I just got asked to do this for them?
um
Was there like a
man, there's been quite a few of those occasions. To say
yeah.
the first one, um, I mean, probably one of the first organizations that I was really glad to be working with was Conscious Alliance, which is a
uh
nonprofit out of Boulder. They
Okay.
basically they feed people in crisis
Oh,
situations.
got you. Are they the
Um,
ones that kind of are up at Red Rock selling
yeah,
stuff? It's
yeah, yeah,
really cool to see. I mean, you've done artwork for shows at Red Rocks.
yep, yep.
Well, were there any like kind of like bucket list artists that you kind of sought out to do artwork for?
Oh, Grateful Dead and Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
can't
mean, I wish I could.
imagine.
Yeah, I wish I could have done something for like Johnny Cash or
Yeah.
you know, there are still some names I would like to do stuff for. I'd like to do something for Bob Dylan, see if that ever
Oh,
happens.
dude, he's
Um,
my all-time favorite songwriter. I mean,
oh
I've been
yeah,
obsessed with
yeah.
Dylan since I was like a kid, man.
Yeah, yeah. But like, Jack Johnson, I did posters for Florida
Wow.
Georgia Line for a couple of years.
Holy shit.
Done various machinations of Grateful Dead stuff.
Yeah.
New Riders, The Purple Sage. I did the wine label for their house wine out there in Oregon.
Hmm.
They call it Panama Red. And yeah, just oh, are you familiar with Betty and Bill Cantor? They were
Sounds familiar.
about Betty boards from the Grateful Dead, where they were actually running the soundboard and she tapped into the soundboard and recorded all these years of show. They're called
Oh,
Betty
okay.
boards.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They got a hold of me and I did a poster for their band called The Pond. Just,
Wow.
yeah, really kind of, and I did the Fuji Rock Fest at one point, and I've done just all kinds of, it's hard to remember, honestly,
Yeah.
because I've been doing it for like 30 years. So,
Yeah, you have incredible stuff. Are there like you said that you kind of like notice like the symbolism and that's kind of like you like behind it. Is there any like symbolism that you throw into your artwork that you kind of like is like a signature?
oh, yeah, there's tons of little things. I'm always putting little
Or
secret
do you
things.
not like disclose that? Sorry if I, like that might be
it's
like a
it's not necessarily, if there's something, I mean, so you figure, I have these ideas in my head, and basically the artwork is just an amalgamation of my processing.
yeah.
So whatever I'm putting into the art is kind of just whatever I'm thinking of at the time.
Hmm.
There are, like, I have consistent things like these clouds that I do, like different, just kind of small things that are just like common accents in the way that I work things, the way I
Yeah.
curve certain lines. It's yeah, just process more than anything, really.
Yeah. Have you ever had any like bands specifically ask you for like to for any like specific symbolism to put inside of the artwork or
Not necessarily symbolism, but kind of they'll come to me with an idea, and
hmm
then I kind of just make it. So, and other times,
like veil a type of message or anything crazy like
um,
that?
yeah, I would say most of the people I work with, I'd
Yeah.
say probably 98% of the people I work with, they're like, we love what you do, just do what you do.
Yeah. Well, I
So
mean, you have a distinct style that's seriously like like I
thank you.
highly
Thank you.
suggest
I
anybody
appreciate it. I
like go
appreciate it.
search it because immediately when I started looking it up, I was like, holy cow. I mean, you're extremely talented. Yeah.
Thanks, man. Thanks. It's something I try not to think about. Pretty much, I'm a hermit in the woods,
Yeah.
and I see my wife every day for, I don't know, probably 4 hours, 5 hours a day. And other than that, I'm kind of just subsiding in, I try not to keep track of time or the date, and I pretty much just hunker down and make all kinds of different things. And then once the summer comes, then I go out and kind of I used to go out and tour and sell and hustle art, and I've kind of relaxed that over the last probably since COVID, and now I'm more out to just see friends and family and kind of go have a good time and show face and kind of yeah. So
Yeah. So do you still go to any of these shows? Do you still kind of you say you live in the East Coast? Do you go on any like kind of runs at all or
I've done Electric Forest every year since they started. I do, there's Picking on Picnic. I like to go down there. I do
okay.
the posters for that.
Very cool.
And then, once we get to Colorado, it's kind of just like, wide open because you got all the
Yeah.
various, Cervantes and Fillmore and like Red Rocks. And, so we'll just go see a plethora of things out in Colorado, and
Cool.
usually go out. I've been out to the hog farm out west. I've, the gorge. I mean, just yeah, like I said, I probably do 5 major shows a year now, you know, but I'll still go see maybe 20-25 shows a year. Whereas before I was going to see, 80, 85. Yeah. So I've really kind of simmered down, but I'm getting old, man. I mean, my bones are getting creaky and kind of, so.
Yeah. Well, hey, I feel it. I mean, well, and honestly, I think the more that you create, I feel like the less, at least for myself, the less I go out and seek after it. I don't know. It's like a weird thing. Like you kind of trade like I used to go out, I used to do the same thing. Like I became obsessed with the Black Crowes like maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And I was like, following up around the East Coast. Like I lived up in Maryland and I was like see them in like Pennsylvania, DC, Virginia, that kind of thing. And
because they spoke to you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And every set was different, man. They wouldn't play the same set the next night. It would be completely different. It'd piss off certain, the common fans. Yeah, man. I really, really appreciate your time. I'd love to have you back on. You remind me of like somebody I would wander into at one of these shows or at one of these festivals and kind of like miss like an entire act or two, like having one of these type of conversations, and it would be totally worth it to me, Like,
and that's basically what I've been doing for the past 30 years at these shows. I am one of those guys that just talks crazy, wild, kind of wingnut shit, So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that about you, man. Anybody can learn a ton from somebody like you, and it's very appreciated that you spent the time today.
Glad you enjoyed it, man. Just holler at me.
Yes, sir.
Around, at least until the sunshine gets here. So
yeah, well, I appreciate it. Thank you once again for your time.